Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to paint Salamanders Space Marines to box art quality. There's tons of awesome Eavy Metal style techniques and tips in this video which I'm sure you'll find really useful, so let's get into the painting. And these are all of the paints that you'll need to follow along with this video. I've started by undercoating the miniature with a matte black spray, and I've left the head separate in a subassembly for ease of painting later on. Our first step is to undercoat the miniature with Caliban green. You don't necessarily need to do this with an airbrush, you can brush it on or even use a dark green spray instead. Just make sure that you get nice coverage because that's going to help us to build up the real armour colour in the next step. Something that I'll often do when working with airbrush layers is fix all of the paint in place with a hairdryer. This dries the paint much faster, gives you a really smooth finish, and you can move on right away. We're now going to apply the main base coat colour for this armour, which for these salamanders is Warpstone Glow. I'm applying this with an airbrush, but if you're patient and you want to build up thin layers with a brush, that's also absolutely fine. You do not need an airbrush to apply this. I just find it much faster, and of course we can get a really nice smooth finish. Alternatively, you could look for a spray can that has a similar tone and hue to the Warpstone Glow to give you that really nice vibrant colour in full coverage. And now that we have a nice smooth green armour colour, we're ready to move on with the brushwork. And to help make it a little bit clearer for you guys following along, I've gone ahead and blocked out all of the areas on the miniature which aren't going to be green power armour in black. We're now going to apply some soft volumetric shading onto the green power armour, and to do that I'm making a 3:1 mix of Warpstone Glow and Rhinox Hide on my wet palette. This needs to be a very, very thin, watery-like consistency, and to help add a little bit of body back into the paint, I'm adding some AK Interactive Glaze Medium. This is the sort of consistency that you should be looking for, and before applying the glazing to the miniature, I first wick off any excess that's loaded into the brush on the back of my glove. Now, as you can see, when I start to apply this glaze, it's incredibly soft and subtle, and that's what we want to be looking for, and what's going to give us that really high-quality, heavy metal-like finish. If you want to learn more about how to apply really smooth glazes onto your miniatures, then check out our Emperor's Children tutorial on the channel as I go into more detail there. After about 3 or 4 passes over each area, you can really start to see that gradient and transition develop and start to give us some really nice shading and darker areas on the panels, which adds tons of volume and depth. Now this step is entirely optional, but I'm going back to our Warpstone Glow and I'm applying that as a glaze in reverse, pushing back up towards the highlighted and the top areas of each of the armor panel. This is to help smoothen that transition out even further, as I'm partly brushing over some of the areas which we have shaded before, and that gives us a smooth transition in each direction. This is also a great opportunity to hide any mistakes or harsh lines which we created in the previous steps. I'm now going to apply a dark and controlled line into all of the recesses on the miniature using a 1-to-1 mix of Nocturne Green and Rhinox Hide. You may want to thin your paint slightly more than a base coat to help it flow off of the brush, but think of this very similar to an edge highlight. We want to be using the tip of the brush and carefully placing it into all of the crevices and recesses on the miniature. Now, to get that bold and crisp Eavy Metal style look, it's not just about the edge highlights, it's about the shading too. And that's why when it comes to applying all of the shading on the miniature, I'm doing it manually and carefully with a brush rather than using washes. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget that you can find the extended version over on our Patreon, where I'll be showing you all of the other details on this miniature and all of the colours and how to paint them. I also go far more in depth on every single technique in these extended videos, which have tons of useful information in them. You'll also find our back catalogue of all of our other video tutorials and tons of other benefits, so check it out at the link down in the description. And now that's all of the shading on the armour complete, and we're ready to move on to our highlighting. Firstly, I'm going to be applying a chunky edge highlight with a 1-to-1 mix of Warpstone Glow and Moot Green. Remember that when we're trying to emulate the Eavy Metal style, we're going to be applying multiple stages of edge highlights within each other. So our first, or chunky stage, is going to be about twice the width of the thinnest edge highlights which you are able to paint. We're going to be applying this over all of the edges of the miniature with no detail spared. You can really start to see the Eavy Metal style coming together now, but we're going to be pushing this even further with our next stages of edge highlighting. And for me, this is where the whole thing really comes together and starts to pop. Now, working within about half of the width of that previous step, I'm going to be highlighting all of the edges again with moot green. That's why it was really important for that previous step to be wider than the thinnest edge highlights which you are able to paint, so that we can work within it rather than painting over it. This effectively gives each edge its own transition and blend, and gives us that really iconic Eavy Metal or box art style look. This is of course a very time-consuming step, however it's probably the most critical to this aesthetic, so really take your time and dial in your concentration to get the highest quality, smooth edges that you can. Use the tip of your brush rather than the edge wherever possible, and remember that working with a slightly thicker paint is often easier to control. Our edges are almost there now, and if you're painting a batch of these miniatures or you're short on time, this is a great point to stop off. However, we're going to now be pushing each edge even further and highlighting some of the brighter corners to give us even more contrast. Using a 1-to-1 mix of moot green and ice yellow, I'm going to be picking out some of the most acute angles and sharp corners of each of the armor panels. This can be the same width as that previous step, just try to brush directionally towards where you want the brightest spot to be. That's going to give us its own mini blend laterally along that edge highlight. Now, as a final stage for this green Salamander's armour, I'm going to be adding a tiny specular highlight dot with some ice yellow to the sharpest corners of each of the armour panels. You want to keep these within scale, so try not to go overboard with these and keep them very sharp and refined. They should be subtle, but once we've applied them all over the areas of the armour, it's really going to push it to the next level. And with that final stage applied, our Eavy Metal style green Salamander's armour is complete. Next, I'm going to show you how to apply some subtle scratching and battle damage to this miniature while keeping in with the Eavy Metal style. First, using moot green and a very sharp small brush, I'm going to very delicately create some scratches leading both away and towards those edge highlights. It can really help to sell these if you make them broken lines. Think of it like trying to skim a rock across water. The easiest way to go wrong with this would be to make the lines too thick, so really ease on the side of caution and creep up on these carefully until you get a feel for it with your brush hand. Now using a 1-to-1 mix of moot green and ice yellow, very much in the same way that we applied our corner highlight stages earlier, I'm going to be picking out the sharpest points and some selective dots on each of the scratches which we've already painted, focusing majoritively on where a scratch meets an edge highlight. And now our Eavy Metal style Salamanders armour is complete. Well, a massive thank you for sticking around to the end of this video tutorial, and I hope that you found it useful in painting your Salamanders Space Marines. If you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel because we put out tutorials like this every single month. And remember that you can find the extended version of all of these tutorial videos over on our Patreon, so check the link down in the description below for that. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one.